There is a moment, just before the engine fires, when the world feels fragile. Your thumb hovers over a worn starter button. Your boot rests on a cold kick lever. The machine beneath you smells of fuel and old metal. It is not quiet, it is waiting. Then the engine ignites. The sound is raw, uneven, almost angry. The frame trembles. The exhaust pulses like a heartbeat that refuses to calm down. And suddenly, you understand something that modern machines have forgotten. Some old bikes still feel dangerous, and they still feel alive. Long before traction control, before riding modes and electronic guardians, motorcycles were built with a single brutal promise: speed, freedom, power without apology. In the middle of the 20th century, the world was rebuilding itself. Cities rose from the dust of war. Highways stretched across continents like veins carrying a new kind of optimism. Factories that once produced aircraft engines and armored vehicles turned their hands back to civilian dreams. But the men designing motorcycles had not forgotten the feeling of risk. They had lived through it. And so the machines they created carried that intensity. Not softened, not filtered, just metal, combustion, and intention. In Britain, in Italy, in Germany, in Japan, workshops hummed with energy. Engineers worked with slide rules and instinct. Designers sketched tanks that looked like aircraft fuselages. Frames were welded by hands that understood strength the way a blacksmith understands steel. They were not building safe machines. They were building expressions of power, and they did not yet know that decades later, those machines would still feel wild. Take a British parallel twin from the 1950s. Narrow tank, long chrome exhausts, wire wheels, no fairing, no wind protection, just an engine exposed to the world like a beating heart. When you kick it to life, it does not whisper. It barks. The vibration travels through your boots, up your spine, into your teeth. The throttle cable pulls directly on carburetor slides. There is no delay, no computer smoothing the response. Twist the grip and the engine answers instantly, sometimes too instantly. The clutch is heavy. The gearbox demands precision. Miss a shift, and the engine protests loudly. The brakes, large for their time, feel almost polite by modern standards. You must plan ahead. You must respect momentum. It feels dangerous, but that danger is part of its soul. In that era, riders did not talk about user experience. They talked about courage. They spoke of machines that could outrun the sunrise, of roads where the wind felt like a wall pushing against your chest, of engines that would shake bolts loose if you rode them hard enough. And yet, people fell in love. Why were these bikes created this way? Because the world demanded speed. Post-war youth wanted something that felt different from their father's sedans and sensible shoes. They wanted a machine that vibrated with rebellion, something lean and mechanical, something that made noise in a quiet neighborhood. Manufacturers understood this hunger. They took racing engines and adapted them for the street. They borrowed ideas from track victories and Isle of Man legends: high-compression pistons, aggressive cam profiles, frames tuned for cornering at speeds that felt reckless for public roads. They did not design for comfort first. They designed for thrill. An Italian V-twin from the 1970s feels like a creature more than a vehicle. Its engine pulses sideways beneath you. The exhaust note is deep and uneven, like distant thunder echoing in a mountain valley. The throttle is sharp, the steering quick, the brakes sometimes unpredictable. At idle, it shakes so much you wonder if something is wrong. It is not wrong. It is alive. The designers in Bologna and Milan believed a motorcycle should stir the soul before it moves the body. Their machines were sculpted as much as engineered: curved tanks catching sunlight, red paint that seemed almost wet, chrome that reflected the world like liquid metal. But underneath, the beauty was steel and fire. These bikes were built in workshops that smelled of oil and espresso. Craftsmen adjusted valve clearances by feel. They listened to engines like doctors listening to hearts. If a machine vibrated too much, they tightened mounts. If it vibrated too little, they sometimes left it alone. Because vibration meant character. Across the ocean, in America, another philosophy took shape. Larger engines, broader frames, long highways stretching across deserts and plains. The machines built for these roads were not delicate. They were muscular. An American V-twin cruiser from the 1960s does not hide its mass. It sits low and heavy. Chrome pipes run along its sides like polished cannons. When the engine fires, the entire bike rocks gently side to side as if clearing its throat. It does not ask permission to exist, it announces itself. Riding it feels like commanding something mechanical and stubborn. The handlebars are wide, the seat soft but thin. The engine's torque is immediate and overwhelming at low speeds. Twist the throttle and it lunges forward with a deep, booming roar. There is no subtlety, but there is honesty. These machines were created for open roads and long journeys, for riders who wanted to feel every mile. They were built with thick steel frames, simple carburetors, and engines that could be repaired in a roadside garage with basic tools. They were meant to endure, and yet they still felt dangerous. Why? Because nothing stood between the rider and consequence. No anti-lock braking systems, no traction control, no electronic stability programs. Rain could make a painted line feel like ice. Gravel in a corner could mean disaster. A misjudged throttle input could send the rear tire spinning violently. You learned respect quickly, or you paid the price. In Japan, a revolution quietly unfolded. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Japanese manufacturers began producing motorcycles that combined reliability with breathtaking performance. Inline-4 engines that screamed at high revs, disc brakes that bit harder than anything before. They were smoother, more refined, but still raw by modern standards. An early Japanese superbike from that era feels like a caged animal at idle. The engine hums with potential. Twist the throttle, and the exhaust note transforms into a metallic howl that rises higher and higher, almost beyond comfort. At speed, the wind hits your chest like a physical force. There is no windshield to hide behind. The frame flexes slightly in fast corners, reminding you that you are riding a machine from another time. And yet the sensation is intoxicating. These bikes were created in an age of competition. Manufacturers raced each other in horsepower and speed. Every new model promised more performance, faster acceleration, higher top speeds, bigger carburetors, stronger frames. It was an arms race of adrenaline, and riders were eager volunteers. The manufacturing process behind these machines was both industrial and intimate. Large presses stamped out steel frames, engines were assembled on production lines, but final adjustments often relied on human senses. Workers tightened bolts by feel, tuned carburetors by ear, tested brakes on real roads, not just in laboratories. The materials were simpler, steel instead of lightweight alloys, mechanical linkages instead of electronic sensors, cables and springs and gears working together in visible harmony. You could see how everything worked, and that visibility created trust, but it also meant vulnerability, because when something went wrong, it went wrong in full view. A slipping clutch, a sputtering carburetor, a brake lever that felt too soft. There were no warning lights, no diagnostic screens, just sensation and sound. You had to listen. You had to feel. Riding one of these old bikes today is like stepping into a different rhythm of time. Modern traffic flows around you. Cars glide silently. Electric vehicles whisper past with eerie calm, and you sit astride a machine that pulses, rattles, and breathes. At idle, it shakes. At speed, it vibrates. The mirrors blur. The exhaust smells rich and slightly sweet. Heat rises from the engine and wraps around your legs. It feels mechanical. It feels alive. There is a moment, usually around mid-range revs, when the engine's character reveals itself. The power surges in a wave rather than a smooth line. The frame communicates every ripple in the road. The suspension, simple and direct, does not isolate you from imperfections. It invites you to engage. You are not just riding, you are participating. That participation is what makes these bikes feel dangerous even now. Modern motorcycles are astonishing. They are faster in every measurable way. They brake harder, corner with greater precision, accelerate with relentless smoothness. Electronics watch over the rider like invisible guardians, but in doing so, they remove something. They remove unpredictability. Old bikes do not promise to save you. They demand your attention. They reward skill. They punish carelessness. They respond to subtle shifts in body position, to gentle throttle adjustments, to precise clutch control. Every ride feels like a conversation, and sometimes an argument. Culturally, these machines became symbols of freedom and defiance. In films, they roared across desert highways. In magazines, they were photographed against sunsets and city skylines. Rock musicians leaned against them on album covers. Young riders gathered in cafes, engines ticking as they cooled. The sound of an old bike arriving was enough to turn heads. Children would run to the curb. Neighbors would peek through curtains. The machine did not just move through space, it altered the atmosphere. There was romance in that. There was also risk. Riders of that era accepted danger as part of the experience. Helmets were simpler. Protective gear minimal. Speeds increased year after year. Highways expanded, and motorcycles kept pushing the limit. The line between thrill and disaster was thin, and everyone knew it. Perhaps that knowledge made each ride more intense. When you swing a leg over a classic machine today, you feel the weight of history beneath you. The seat may be worn, the paint slightly faded, the chrome showing tiny imperfections from decades of sunlight. But when the engine fires, time compresses. You are transported. The handlebars vibrate in your hands. The throttle cable tugs slightly. The exhaust pulses against your back. You roll forward, and the clutch engages with a mechanical honesty that modern hydraulics have softened. The first corner approaches. You lean in. There is no electronic safety net, just tires, suspension, and your judgment. The bike feels eager but slightly unpredictable. The road surface matters, the temperature matters, your confidence matters, and that is exactly why it feels alive. Danger, in this context, is not about recklessness. It is about awareness. It is about the thin layer of rubber between you and asphalt, the heat in the engine, the timing of combustion happening thousands of times per minute beneath your knees. You are part of that process. Old bikes also carry imperfections that modern engineering has erased. Gearboxes that clunk, throttles that require steady hands, brakes that fade if pushed too hard, lights that glow warmly instead of shining brilliantly. But those imperfections are not flaws. They are fingerprints. They remind you that this machine was born in a different era. An era when progress meant more power, not more software. When the goal was to win races and impress riders, not to achieve silent efficiency. Even the way they look tells a story. Narrow seats, exposed frames, engines on display, no plastic fairings hiding complexity. Every fin on the cylinder head serves a purpose. Every cable has a path you can trace with your eyes. They are honest machines, and honesty can feel dangerous because nothing is hidden. Over the decades, many of these bikes became legends, not just because they were fast, but because they had personality. Some were known for their wild acceleration, others for their stubborn reliability, some for their unpredictable handling that demanded courage. Stories grew around them, tales of midnight rides, of cross-country journeys, of races won by inches, of breakdowns in the rain that turned into friendships in roadside garages. These stories became part of the machine's identity, and that identity still lingers. Collectors restore them carefully, polishing tanks, rebuilding engines, searching for original parts in dusty warehouses. But even in perfect condition, they never lose their edge, because the design itself carries risk. A high-revving engine from the 1970s still feels urgent. A big air-cooled twin still shakes at idle. A lightweight cafe racer still darts through corners with nervous energy. Time has not dulled their spirit. In fact, it may have sharpened it, because in a world that grows quieter and more controlled every year, rawness stands out. When you park an old bike next to a modern one, the contrast is striking. The modern machine looks sculpted by wind tunnels and software simulations, smooth surfaces, integrated lights, digital displays glowing softly. The old bike looks mechanical. Its engine dominates the silhouette. Its exhaust pipes curve proudly. Its controls are simple switches and cables. The paint may not be flawless. The chrome may not be perfect. But it feels real. And when both engines start, the difference is undeniable. The modern bike purrs with precision. The idle is stable. The exhaust note refined. It sounds efficient. The old bike growls. It coughs once. It settles into a slightly uneven rhythm. It feels like it is working, even when standing still. One feels engineered. The other feels alive. This sense of life is what keeps riders coming back. Not because these machines are easy, they are not. Not because they are comfortable, often they are not. But because they demand something. They demand focus. They demand respect. And in return, they offer something rare. They offer presence. When you ride an old motorcycle, you cannot check your phone. You cannot drift into autopilot. The vibrations remind you. The wind reminds you. The engine's temperature reminds you. You are here. You are moving. You are alive. Even the smell is part of the experience. A faint hint of unburned fuel, warm oil, metal heating and cooling. These scents are absent from most modern machines, filtered away by efficiency and emission systems. But on an old bike, they linger. They tell you the engine is breathing. There is also sound, not just volume, but character. The deep thump of a big twin, the sharp bark of a single-cylinder engine, the high-pitched scream of an early four-cylinder racing machine. Each sound is distinct. Each sound is unmistakable. Close your eyes, and you can often identify the era just by listening. That auditory signature creates emotion. It stirs something primal. It connects you to decades of riders who heard the same rhythm and felt the same rush. It is not nostalgia alone. It is continuity. These bikes still matter because they represent a turning point in mechanical history. They were born when engineering met ambition without digital restraint, when designers trusted steel and instinct, when riders were partners, not passengers. They remind us that technology can be thrilling, not just efficient. They remind us that risk can be meaningful, not just reckless. And they remind us that machines can have personality. In quiet garages around the world, old motorcycles rest under covers. Dust gathers gently, but when someone pulls back the fabric and turns a key, something awakens. The fuel flows. The spark ignites. The engine comes to life with that familiar vibration. And for a moment, decades collapse. The rider becomes part of a lineage, a chain of hands that have gripped those handlebars, a sequence of boots that have pressed that shifter. A collection of journeys etched invisibly into metal. It is more than transportation, it is inheritance. Even younger riders, raised in an age of digital precision, feel it. They may have grown up with smooth engines and quiet cabins, but when they experience an old bike for the first time, there is often surprise. Surprise at how physical it feels, how loud, how demanding, and how strangely satisfying, because effort creates connection. Modern machines remove friction from the experience. They make riding accessible and safe, and that is a remarkable achievement. But in removing friction, they also remove some of the intimacy. Old bikes are intimate. You feel their strengths and their weaknesses. You learn their quirks. You adjust your riding style to suit their character. Over time, you form a relationship. You know exactly how much choke they need on a cold morning, exactly how far to pull the clutch before it engages, exactly how the engine sounds when it is happy. That familiarity builds trust. And trust, in something that can be dangerous, feels powerful. There is a particular sensation on an old motorcycle at sunset. The light turns golden. Shadows stretch across the road. The engine's note echoes off buildings or hillsides. The air cools slightly against your face. You are aware of everything. The road surface, the wind direction, the rhythm of traffic, the temperature of the engine beneath you. It feels cinematic, not because it is staged, but because it is honest. These machines were not built to be collectibles. They were built to be ridden, to be pushed, to be used daily, to commute, to race, to explore, and many of them survived. They survived crashes and neglect. They survived trends and regulations. They survived the rise of plastic and processors. They remain, and when they run, they do not feel outdated. They feel elemental. That element of danger is part of the appeal. It sharpens your senses. It slows your mind. It makes every mile meaningful. You cannot ride carelessly. You cannot assume forgiveness. You must ride well. And when you do, the reward is profound. A smooth gear change executed perfectly. A corner taken with balanced throttle. An engine singing in harmony with your input. These moments feel earned. They feel alive. There is something deeply human about that exchange. Metal responding to muscle, combustion responding to courage, motion responding to intent. Old bikes make that exchange visible and audible. They do not hide it behind layers of software. And perhaps that is why they still resonate. In a world increasingly mediated by screens and silent systems, an old motorcycle feels direct, immediate, tangible. It vibrates in your hands and speaks in mechanical language. It asks you to listen. It asks you to feel. And if you do, it rewards you with something rare, a sense of aliveness that cannot be downloaded or simulated. As night falls and the ride ends, the engine ticks softly as it cools. Heat rises in faint waves. The metal contracts with gentle clicks. The smell of fuel lingers in the air. You remove your helmet. Your ears still hum with the echo of the ride. You look back at the machine, its paint reflecting the last light, its shape unmistakably from another time. It stands there, silent now, but not tame, because tomorrow, when the engine fires again, it will still feel dangerous, and it will still feel alive. And in that sound, in that vibration, in that pulse of combustion and steel, you will remember that some machines are not meant to be safe. They are meant to make you feel the road, the wind, and your own heartbeat. They are meant to remind you that freedom has texture, that power has weight, that risk has meaning. Old bikes endure because they carry those truths in every bolt and every breath of fuel. They endure because they refuse to become quiet. And as long as someone is willing to turn a key, to press a starter, to kick a lever with intention, they will continue to roar against the silence of modernity. Still dangerous, still alive, and still waiting for the next rider brave enough to listen.